pleased to present the Memoirs of Billy Shears by Thomas E. U. Harriot, performed by Gregory Paul Martin.
Forward. When Thomas E. U. Harriot first approached me about narrating this book, I was curious. I had no idea such a strong belief was still prevalent in the Beatles subculture that the rumor about Paul's death all those years ago was true. Exploring the possibility in the form of a novel seemed an intelligent way to address the subject, and the extent of U. Harriot's knowledge of the subject interested me. As a gifted actor, I have a natural facility for mimicry. My version of Paul McCartney's voice came easily to me, especially since I've known him since I was 5 years old. I first met Paul in the winter of 1962, just a few months after my father, Sir George Martin, signed the Beatles to Parlophone Records. To record the memoirs, I thought it would be most fitting to use the original recording equipment that the Beatles had used at Abbey Road Studios with help from my father and from engineers Jeff Emerick and Dave Harris. That equipment is now located at the prestigious British Grove Studios. On several occasions during the recording process, while sitting at that same equipment to record this book that the Beatles and my father had used for their vast catalogue of songs, I felt I had become Paul. While this experience is a natural part of an actor's process, in this instance, with this subject matter, it felt uncanny. Is Paul dead? I leave that to you to decide. Meanwhile, in Paul's words, let me introduce you to the one and only Billy Shears. Gregory Paul Martin. Chapter 1. Dreams of Paul. Almost everything about me taking Paul's place was made possible because of the dreams that Paul had, showing his death and me replacing him, and by my dreams of Paul showing me how. First, let me, William Shepherd, Billy Shears, tell you of a more recent dream. I want it told before I die so that you'll know I knew. After discussing my undertakings in his name, Paul said, "You will be released on the 21st of February, 2014. I asked for a 9-year extension for more tours. Since I needed to see my Utah-based encoder one last time, a tour would include it. Until I am done, this book will be distributed on a level that will keep it down. We will keep it underground until I am. Yesterday is a massive hit from well before I came along. That song had more airplay than any other number ever written, and is the most recorded song. That sweet melody in its entirety sprang forth unbroken from one of Paul's dreams. He woke up with it at Jane Asher's house one morning in May 1965. He shared it with several people on the set of Help. The music surpassed Paul's own natural aptitude, surprising everyone. The words came to him a bit later. At first, nonsense words kept the young song from devolving. He sang something like, "Scrambled eggs, my, but don't you have such lovely legs?" Within about 5 days, the real lyrics came to him based on some other dreams, actually nightmares, he had first mentioned on the 29th of January. Those dreams provoked the theme of yesterday and engendered material he used in most of his other songs for the rest of his life. Paul's dreams haunted him. Once he saw the Beatles recording his When I'm 64 at the Abbey Road Studios, but he wasn't one of them. He was merely an observer, floating a little above an unknown musician. John said, "Paul," and the musician answered. Paul saw the stranger's face, looking a bit similar to his own. A gentle voice behind him, unheard by the others, said, "Paul, this is the man who will take your place." The dream panicked him, but also gave him a face to seek out. Such dreams became frequent. Some were grotesque. In one, Brian Epstein handed John a picture. John saw it and laughed hysterically, as though he'd gone totally mad. Then Paul, in his dream, saw himself in the picture. His head had been smashed off. Paul awoke in a cold sweat, reaching for his head to be sure it was there, then rehearsed it that day to all who would hear him. Each dream contradicted the others until it all played out. He and George were upset in one, and Paul yelled at Brian in another. A girl in one dream stood in a storm holding an old suitcase. Paul moved a folder of papers from the passenger seat and let her in. The girl recognized him and excitedly asked him to sing along, with one of his songs. Going from station to station up and down the radio dial, at first she could not find his songs. Continuously interrupting herself with each song, she bounced from one incoherent thought to another, about poverty, hard work, and about God or fate uniting them forever. Suddenly they were thrown sideways into a pole, which, like a silver hammer that came down upon his head, made sure that he was dead. Hardly a day ever passed without Paul discussing one of his horrific nightmares. Finally, Vernon E. Mosher, one of Kenneth Anger's Satanists, met the Beatles on the 11th of May, the last day of filming Help. Interpreting Paul's dreams, Mosher said, "They mean that you're the one. You're the goat, the band's sacrifice. When did you make your compact with Satan?" Measuring Paul's life, Mosher crunched some numbers, then read Paul's palm for validation. He said, "You've about 15 more months, kid." Oscillating then from despair to dedication, Paul was always heavily burdened, but more determined to use his remaining days productively with albums and another tour. Mosher's predicted timing was too soon by 1 month. The last several months of Paul's life reflected his tormenting dreams. His music had a new seriousness in it from January 1965 until he died in September 1966, evoking deeper feeling that reflect troubles far beyond his old quaint love songs. He sought for originality and far greater quality in his writing. The band was crucially important to him, but was not as important as his own personal growth and musical excellence. The stress contributed to the lovely music of Yesterday. That is how the young lad was able to write that solemn message. Yesterday describes him suddenly not being half the man he used to be. What changed? Only one thing. My shadow was suddenly hanging over him. As was usual, Paul gave it a romantic context, not ever wanting to just sing what was on his mind. Why she had to go, I don't know. Yet everyone knew his romantic life had nothing to do with the woman leaving him. The Ashers were all family to him. Jane was with him for the rest of his life. They were both very securely in love. It is ridiculous to suppose otherwise. Paul was sleeping upstairs in her family's handsome home in the centre of London on 57 Wimpole Street when he wrote that song. The perceptibly profound depth of feeling made it a huge success, but those feelings were not about losing anyone, but himself. To most people who knew Paul, the song had nothing to do with his own life. Furthermore, it had nothing to do with the Beatles. They credited it to Lennon McCartney, as with all of the songs that either of them wrote, but John had nothing to do with it, neither did George, neither did Ringo. Paul had the music from one dream, and the message given to him from a few others. Being far beyond Beatles' arts instrumentally, Paul hides strangers, a string quartet of session musicians. Being patently non-Beatle made them question how to release it in the UK. Locals knew better, and knew Jane. Paul was endowed with that song in May 1965 and recorded it weeks later. It was on the album Help, released in August. The next month, it was released as a single in the US, but not here until 10 years after I joined the band. Finally, in 1976, at my suggestion, we released it as a UK single. On the B-side of Help was I'm Down. They were not released on albums in the US or in the UK until Rock and Roll Music, also in 1976. Before recording Yesterday, Paul felt that he needed to warm up to it. He began that day, 14th of June 1965, by recording I'm Down. He then did the even more obscure I've Just Seen a Face before recording his Yesterday vocals. The song, I'm Down, was in response to the remaining Fab Four making jokes about his blues over his persistently haunting dreams. John's laughter and Paul's father's disbelief hurt Paul the most. Paul sang, I'm down, down to the ground. How can you laugh when you know I'm down? Being most spooked in the beginning by his dream of seeing my face when John called his name, Paul obscured this line in his next song. I've just seen a face I can't forget, by a romantic context, with the utmost opposite false love message as the one he recorded next. Here, Paul meets a girl, next he regrets losing one, all in the same recording session, and all the while staying at the home of Jane, his steady date. In that second song, Paul is falling, yes, I'm falling, suggesting that he was falling in love. Really, he feared falling as Humpty Dumpty, the Eggman, saying "Gug-gug-gujube" and entering eternity, joining all the fallen. Having just seen my face, which to Paul was at the face of death, he announces to all, "I just want to tell the world we met." He recorded all three of these songs on a Monday. Paul had the string quartet added to yesterday days later, Thursday the 17th of June 1965, the same day Ringo recorded the Buck Owens song Act Naturally, with advice to me, as the Paul he expected. It was written by Vonnie Morrison and Johnny Russell. When I joined, I said that using all other songs wasted royalties. I stopped it until I had incentives, a court settlement. That song, as very many other songs from this time, fit their new Paul theme. Making more movies was an expectation they held. As me, Ringo sang, "They're going to put me in the movies. They're going to make a big star out of me. We'll make a film about a man that's sad and lonely. The sad loneliness that I and my bandmates suffered inspired the line Lonely Hearts Club Band. And all I got to do is act naturally. Well, I'll bet you I'm going to be a big star." Ringo had it right. Ever since Paul died, I've dreamed of him more often than he had of me.